Okay. Thoughts about Saving Private Ryan? Did we all eat lunch right afterwards?
I can't believe I watched that at such a young age. Rewatching that opening scene, I was like,
When you're
man,
10.
pretty brutal.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Listen.
I really liked it. I kind of feel like it's interesting how they're basically deciding to like send people out on a rescue mission. I got the impression it was because they didn't want this one woman to lose all of her kids to the war.
That's basically it.
Which,
Well,
like-
you notice they're calling it a PR move. They don't want everyone to know that woman lost all of her kids.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
mean, I feel like it's like surprisingly, this is the wrong word, but like surprisingly soft for the military at the time. Like it's surprisingly like decent, I guess.
well, the Sullivans was a really big PR disaster for the military, and they
Yeah.
wanted
That's
they wanted to make sure that they had a good supply of recruits, and if they can get 5 sons out of a family, that's better than 3 sons. But if if the news starts getting around, you might lose all 5. You know,
Yeah,
the parents are not
yeah.
going to allow all 5 to enlist or whatever. Eric,
Yeah.
That opening with the hatches opening is why leaders will talk about people having to die in war rather than there just being the possibility.
Yeah.
So, you know, sometimes your buddy just functioning as a shield will help further everyone else.
Uh-huh.
Things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you're aware of it. They shouted it in the middle of the thing, but I don't know if you caught it. But the reason that was so deadly was that the Germans had 2 or 3 years to set. I mean, yeah, they conquered France in 1940. They had 3 years at least by 44 to build those bunkers, but also to site everything, so they knew exactly. They had practiced hitting that spot on the beach, that spot on the beach. So when those LSTs open the doors, you know, the machine gunners know exactly how to hit that, and that's why it was so devastating. I'll get to you in a second.
Another thing too is that like even when they were getting up to the beaches, people were like visibly in distress and like throwing up and praying and
Yeah.
whatnot. So they kind of knew what they were going into. If these men had good leaders, they probably would have informed them beforehand. Some of you aren't gonna come back from this.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm not normally really squeamish when it comes to portrayals of death in media, but that was hard to watch.
Yeah.
I
Why?
like the handheld footage of the camera and like the perspective because it just made it much more realistic.
Mm-hmm. Elena and then Lisa.
Yeah, like with the whole PR move, I guess, like that makes more sense to me now. Like that it is like, I guess I like missed the part where they talked about it being like partially like a PR move to like get this guy out of there. Cause I don't know, like even with it still like being a PR move, like knowing that now, I still think it's like kind of goofy. Like it's just like I don't understand. Like I guess like just with like the scene them setting it up and we're seeing like all of these people dying, I don't understand how like saving one guy is going to like even make a difference. Like it's not like they're calling off the war by getting this guy out of there.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that like, because you said this wasn't based on a real story, actually.
No.
This
Right.
was-
Correct.
So it seems to me that the reason they're going off to do that is because Steven Spielberg needed a believable enough conceit as to why he's getting what appears is going to be like a small group of soldiers who are going to be off alone, so we can
Yes.
explore
Yeah.
their like group dynamic specifically. So I think the reason that they're going to do this is because Steven Spielberg, this was the best idea Steven Spielberg had to wire like 5 to 10 soldiers gonna be going off all alone and not staying with the rest of the army.
Yeah, you're really breaking down the fourth wall here. Talking about the making of the movie. But yeah, I mean, you're probably right.
Something that I think is interesting is that when they were underwater and like, because we kind of talked about this in Gallipoli, about how like the bullets didn't, like they slowed down a lot in the water. So those people were just not deep enough because they looked deep, but then like also the bullets were going very fast.
Well,
Steven Spielberg is just a bad director.
Well,
He didn't know the
I've read accounts by Navy SEALs in World War II who would dive 5 feet underwater, and then you could just grab the bullets out of the water with. That's what they claimed. Now, those are guys who'd actually done it. I think the Gallipoli. I think the Gallipoli was shrapnel, which does not have the velocity or the aerodynamic nature of bullets. The bullets you're talking about there are probably 50 caliber machine gun bullets, which have really high muzzle velocity, and so they are going to go farther in the water and be deadly longer. Whereas if you have a shell exploding, it's just throwing randomly sized bits of metal in all directions, and doesn't have that kind of velocity.
Okay.
So
That's why they were dying underwater so much.
Yeah, and I think it was clear they were only in 5 feet of water or something, so the bullets were not going through that much water. I don't know how you'd research this. I'm sure there is some scientific paper somewhere about how.
Probably with a vigorous Google search, find out how deadly bullets are and how much of water. Like,
Yeah. Erica.
Going back to the they're going to save the one dude because they don't want his mom to freak out. I just think that that's so interesting because it proves that women should have a say in the war because they're literally going to save one dude so that this woman can have one son left.
Yeah.
But we still see no women soldiers or women on the field. Granted, this is a extreme example.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're doing it so the one woman doesn't freak out. I'm going to be very cynical here. I don't think they actually care about her emotional well-being. They're worried about this story, and this is exactly the type of story. The Sullivans were all over newspapers all over the U.S., and everybody knew about the Sullivans. So that they didn't want that again. So what they're worried about is the country freaking out, not that mother.
Right.
But something that's just a little interesting about this is like even if they save him now, like unless they send him home, what's going to stop him from just getting shot some of the time?
Oh, they will send him.
well, yeah,
home.
they said he gets a leave, he got a ticket to leave, but
Yeah.
he's getting leave.
They send him home. They discharge him. Why?
Yeah, I think what's interesting and to kind of illustrate the point that they probably don't care is you have that whole typing pool of middle-aged women and younger women, and then there, that narration, that voiceover of the officers writing the letters, but they're not writing the letters. It's these typists writing the letters in this huge pool just to crank them out as fast as possible because this is how many people are dying. And it's just, it's a way to kind of write their deaths off, but make it feel sincere. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I also, this is a very Steven Spielberg thing, and I don't want to trash on Steven Spielberg because he's a great filmmaker, but he has certain quirks. And one of them is that he likes to hide fairly cynical motivations under really heart-rending anecdotes. Like the Abraham Lincoln letter is the justification for why they're going to do this. And that's a touching, heart-rending letter, and it's really eloquently written. But, and that's the only discussion they have, right? There's the one guy says, the team you're sending is all going to be killed in action. So he's got a humanitarian argument that, having a bunch of people killed for one guy is not worth it. Nobody makes the PR argument. Nobody says that, right? And then he brings out the Abraham Lincoln letter, and that is the justification. So you're supposed to take that as the justification. They have moral, they're doing this for moral reasons. But as soon as Tom Hanks gets his orders, what's the major or whatever colonel say? He says, I've got a PR mission for you. They know that this is PR, but Steven Spielberg doesn't show that overtly. So there is I want you to be aware of this because war movies are often very subtle in how they present justifications for things and how they present the moral wrestling with the implications of war. and doing things like having that Abraham Lincoln letter, instead of having discussion about what this is going to look like on the cover of the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times and what this is going to do for Army recruitment, you're sort of shifting the justification, you're shifting the meaning of the mission itself, right? Exactly.
Two things. You can tell that the officers like that got charged with the mission are like, well, this is bullshit, but you know, we gotta do what we gotta do. Like, if you're just cleaning out minefield, might as well just walk into the back of enemy lines. And Mythbusters tested the myth at the angle that they were firing, the bullet would lose velocity within 3 feet of water.
3 feet.
So it was just for show.
Well, but also, there were like a lot of people standing up, and they were like in the middle of the water. So like, if they were only 2 feet below the surface, like they could have gotten hit.
But like, they were through and through shots. Like,
Yeah, some of them were a little intense.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if Spielberg was playing fast and loose with physics, but I would also wonder about the Mythbusters. What caliber gun were they using? What, you know, all of that.
Say, yeah, I assume the MG42 is like a pretty high caliber rifle.
Okay, listen.
Also, I just wanted to like, okay, what was the real like you said it was a big PO disaster with the
Sullivan's.
yeah, but what was the immediate response?
It was mostly patriotic in the sense that there was a celebration of Mrs. Sullivan, not so much Mr. Sullivan, and the loss, what they'd sacrificed for the nation. And it was language similar to that Abraham Lincoln letter, like they, you know, sacrificed their children on the altar of freedom, you know, that kind of thing. There was a very hokey Hollywood movie made about Sullivans, which romanticized all of it. I think, yeah, I'm not sure beyond that. I have not studied the Sullivans. I know who they were, but yeah, I haven't really studied the blow-by-blow reaction and how the American public responded. The other thoughts on Saving Private Ryan?
I'm interested to see who else composes the like PR missions team, because like it was the like first 2 characters that we see that are going to be on the team are obviously Tom Hanks, and then he has to go find the translator. And like they're already so clearly like supposed to be opposites of each other, like with their masculinities. Like
yeah, and what's going to happen with the translator? I mean, if you have to predict right now, and I don't mean like what events are going to happen, but in terms of his masculinity, what's going to happen?
He's going to have to learn how to be a man.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, they're setting it up. Tom Hanks is clearly a man. He's unflustered by going into German territory. He's, you know, and
but
the other guy
like,
is all, you know, dropping stuff, and he's grabbing
Tom
stuff.
Hanks is still like a sympathetic, like leader kind of. Like he's willing to take on responsibility, but he's not like asking more of people than he's willing to. Like he's not like a crazy like the macho like crazy dude or like
we'll get them in the
evil British, like a British. He's not like the British leaders in Gallipoli, but like I'm excited to see like I have a feeling that you can kind of predict what the different types will be, but it's like already so clear that they're supposed to be opposites of each other.
Well, I'll spoil it. Vin Diesel is the New York Italian.
Yeah, super macho.
That was like the guy who was praying before sniping Mr. Shuriken.
Then what else is he gonna play? He's going to that, right?
He's gonna be there.
Oh yeah, well they need a Southerner, and he's a Southerner. He's from Tennessee, and so they, you know, they got the Southern.
He had like an Italian. I kept being like, why is that Italian man? Like he had like this really Italian vibe with like kissing the cross and like just his face.
Yeah, and yeah, so and the sergeant who was in, you know, the main sort of next to Hanks in the whole storming the beach thing, bigger guy. At one point, Hanks sends the sniper up to that forward spot to shoot at the machine gun nest, and the sergeant says to him, his mother would not be happy, or, you know, with you for doing that, and he says, I thought you were my mother, or something like that. You know, that guy's in there. Listen.
So we'll kind of change the subject a little bit. On the syllabus for tomorrow, it doesn't list a movie. Why is that?
probably a typo.
Are we not doing a movie tomorrow?
Where we probably won't then, unless you want to charge ahead with Saving Private Ryan. I probably, I'll just, this is more than you need to know, but when I update a syllabus for a new course, I take the last syllabus and I change all the dates and I move everything around. And there was probably a reason there was not a movie that day. It could also just be that this has always been an awkward class in that one more movie is too much. And one less movie, I don't quite have enough. So that might have been that, but I don't know why I did that. How many of you would like to keep going Saving Private Ryan and then have a break between Saving Private Ryan and Thin Red Line or something like that?
Yeah.
And how many would like to take the day and not have a movie and get out of class early?
Well, I'm not gonna be here tomorrow because of my geology field trip.
Okay. What's today? Thursday? Tomorrow? Friday? Okay. Yeah. Given that, let's stick to the schedule. Although I know I'm going to regret this because I have a movie scheduled on the last day of class, and it always gets tight at that last. I'm like trying to wrap everything up and show the rest of the movie and all the rest. But let's stick with no movie tomorrow. We'll just get out of class early, and then you two won't be missing much, or won't be missing the movie at least. So, any other thoughts on Saving Private Ryan? Eric?
I hope they do a good job of preparing Upham for the shit that he's about to get into. You know, if they wanted him to really pull his weight, they give him a weapon and go and, you know, just try and scare him a little bit, because it looks like what they did before was they just said to him, he's a combat correspondent, you know, he's fine, everyone's gonna be taking care of all the heavy lifting for him.
Yeah.
So hopefully Upham's new captain sees that and realizes, you know, we might get into a situation where it's just, you know, totally fucked up. We need all hands that we can get. I need Upham to kill Germans. That's what I need.
I don't want to spoil anything. I will say this, that Upham has a very specific function in this, which has nothing to do with war. It's that when you have a tight-knit culture that your audience doesn't know about, like soldiers in combat in World War II, you always bring in a character who's new to the situation so that the audience learns along with the character. So Upham's going to be learning all about military culture, and there's going to be a whole lot of teaching him military culture as the movie goes on. I don't know if you'll be disappointed. I'll just say that. Kylie.
I read up a bit about like the Canadian British Juno Beach stuff last night, and I ended up finding a more dire military document from the same regiment my great grandfather was in, which was
cool.
crazy to find on the Canadian Library Archives last
Yeah.
night of their account of Juno Beach.
Yeah.
Couldn't find his name, but I knew it was the one he was in. Was there a town that the Americans were trying to take? Because I know that Caen was what the British they instead of
I don't think so. I think they were just trying to get above the bluffs.
Yeah.
And in fact, that it turned out that was just the beginning, because, and I'll talk more about this in a later lecture, but and we'll see it in the movie. Maybe I should talk about it now. This is Normandy, and so they get off the beaches, and there's the bluffs, obviously, which are where the Germans put their line of defense. And once they had fought their way through that, a lot of American officers thought that France is pretty flat. Northern France is flat. We'll go. It'll be fast. But it turns out that they were in what's called bocage country, which is, since the Middle Ages, French peasants in that part of Normandy had that the soil was really rocky, and so whenever they were plowing the field and they hit a rock, they would dig the rock up and throw it on the edge of the field in the hedge, and they would have hedges around each field. And by the time World War II happened, those hedgerows were often 10-foot high walls of rock and dirt that had been there for 1,000 years, and with trees growing out of them and roots running through them, and they were absolutely tank-proof and bulletproof. And so the Germans had this sort of, every field was another row of trenches automatically made, ready to go. And so it was really nasty fighting for, I mean, this was June 6th, and they were fighting through July just to get 20 miles inland because it was bocage. And then once they finally got out of that, because it was particular to that part of Normandy, it doesn't happen everywhere in France. Once they got out of that, the Germans basically pulled out of France altogether, and the Americans just cruised into Paris, and then and we'll see that because they actually do they don't dwell on it, but if you're looking for it, you can see that they're actually doing a pretty good job of showing that. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Saint-Lô, Saint Elo. I think that was one of the goals, but I'd have to go look it up. That just popped into my head, and I'm not sure, but I'll.
Yeah, because I opened up the document and it had like a bunch of like the account stuff and the appendix stuff, and it was all like old typewriting, so it was turning purple.
Oh, absolutely.
Document, so I was like, oh my god, this is so hard to read. I found a second one that was from like 2 years prior where they were doing some training, and there was like a bunch of accounts of like an exercise, and basically like the one they did in Gallipoli. But there was one where it was like all the soldiers are stealing the utensils. Tell them to stop stealing the utensils. And there was another where they were talking about like a rugby game, and they were like, our rugby regiment like missed the game. Accounts would have shown that they probably would have won. There was a bunch of silly stuff like that. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. But my own rabbit hole last night.
I assume this is all online. Yeah.
There was a bunch of them, but they were like not digitized. I found 2 that were digitized. But
Yeah. One of the interesting aspects of historical research, you can't do this anymore because everything's online. They've digitized everything. I mean, you can go now to the Bibliothèque Nationale de France website and see every single page of every single newspaper in their entire, I mean, thousands of newspapers over hundreds of years is in their archives, and every one of them digitized. You can see them all. But it used to be that you would go and you'd get a box, and the box would contain paper that was deteriorating rapidly. But one of the things that I really came to appreciate when I was doing my research on France in the 1930s is the invention of the paperclip, because the French police, for all of their files before that, used straight pins. You just stuck a pin through the piece of paper and try to go through a box full of things with straight pins.
Stabbing yourself with 60-year-old pins.
Yeah, exactly.
You got your tetanus shots.
All right, any other thoughts on Saving Private Ryan so far? All right. Does everybody know who Private Ryan turns out to be, actor-wise?
No.
Matt Damon.
Oh, is it
It's
Matt Damon? I thought Matt Damon was in this film.
And the guy at the beginning sort of looks like Matt Damon.
I
But
was like, is that whoever Private Ryan is in old man makeup, or is that just another guy who looks like he's an old man wearing a young man wearing old
That
man?
would
we'll have to find out.
I couldn't figure that out.
Yeah, so anyway, we will continue watching that today, and then we will not watch a movie tomorrow, and then we will finish Saving Private Ryan. Maybe we'll even save Private Ryan on Monday.
Wow.
Let's hope.
Okay, then any thoughts on the Salatin Mulreen readings? Those were from 2014 and 2015, and this was right when the U.S. military first allowed women to try out for combat roles, and obviously it's up in the air at the time those were written. Zach?
It's interesting to see the difference between how the Marines and the Army took it. The Army was much more like, yeah, we can just physical fitness. We'll focus on that and get you through, and like, you know, easy peasy. And the Marines like, fucking women. What do you mean? No, like
There definitely is a culture in each branch of the military. Other thoughts?
I thought it was interesting too, because it was like, we just trained them and it was okay, and then we were just like, but what if we have to like lower our standards?
Yeah, I was interested how worried that the Salatin article was that like This must have been like a pervasive fear as people were letting women into the military that like, or women into combat roles, is that like, it won't be that they're recognizing women can meet their standards, but that all of a sudden all of our militaries are going to drop our standards to let women do combat.
Yep. And that was the essential debate, was the people who were proponents of women in combat said, let's find out if they can do it and maybe modify how we train to test for things that, really pertain to, because I mean, doing pull-ups doesn't have a whole lot to do with combat, I mean, and then the other group said basically, no, if you're talking about changing training or whatever, you're lowering standards to allow women to make it in, and their assumption is that women could not do it, and so that there would, there was no point trying this, and the only result could be lowering of standards. And that was the debate, essentially. Yeah.
Well, it was really interesting that there was one quote in the longer article about how like one of the like guys was like, there's actually some men in these units that because we don't have like a standardized like a testing like we are trying to develop to get women into it, there's some men in these units who probably shouldn't or can't like pass these same rigorous standards.
Yep.
And from the I highlight the one quote where it's like facing and killing a large aggressive enemy, aggressive male enemy soldier, if necessary, in hand-to-hand combat requires a certain ferocity, aggression, and killer instinct. That is most characteristic of men and women and other stuff. And it was just like, just the ingrained, like dissecting all of that in this class, and just like the ingrained idea that like that's a man's thing.
Well, there's also one thing. I mean, I remember this. I was aware of it at the time, but one thing in the debate was that if you think about the functions that soldiers do in combat, the section is talking about getting artillery shells into a cannon. That is a key part of being in an artillery unit or a tank crew in combat. But actually killing someone hand to hand with a knife.
Yeah, are people doing that anymore at all in war?
Well, actually, I mean, I will say it shows up in Saving Private Ryan, but
that was World War II, not
Yeah.
2014.
But I mean, yes, it does happen, but does it happen often enough that you would need to exclude people who can't do that and only take people who can do that? And even within roles, is a combat helicopter pilot ever likely to get into a knife fight with somebody?
Hopefully not.
Etc. Kylie, and then this.
Yeah, like just the idea of this class when going through, and it's like, well, like we were thinking about all that, it was like it came down to survival, like everything about like that was a horrible war for everybody, it was like a matter of whether or not you wanted to live or die, and like what he had to do in like the whole where he had to stab the guy and then he freaked out about it, but it was just like it's like I'm thinking about no human generally wants to hurt another human. If there's some people that are crazy that do that, but like there's they're like, yeah, and men can just do that on a whim. I was like, what the heck are you talking about reading? Like,
yeah. Listen.
Also, I think something that's interesting is that like there are certain things that like one could argue that like women would be better for, like because and like I know that this probably wouldn't be all that big of a deal, but like women on average tend to weigh a little bit less than men, and like that might actually make them like better like at certain
Tank crews.
well exactly like in certain like military roles where like being like physically smaller and lighter might give them like an advantage over somebody who's like physically larger and heavier, which of course like there are men who are like smaller, there are women who are like physically larger, but like size wise like what I'm saying is that there isn't really like things that was typically put into the women category, like that can be useful instead of being seen as just like, oh, it's a hindrance because like women aren't as like women are small enough that they don't have the upper body strength. It's like, I mean, some women just are 6 feet tall and can like bench press a whole bunch. and like some men just can't. But it's like, instead of saying, okay, maybe people who can't like bench press a whole bunch can have other skills that would be useful that people who can bench press a lot can't.
Yeah.
Instead, they're just like, well, it's only that one kind that we want.
It kind of made me think about how there have been more studies recently about how women are getting hurt in car crashes more because the seatbelt was designed around a man. So it made me think about, well, if you're a woman trying to get into the army and everything has been specifically designed for how a man's going to do it, it's going to make it so much harder for you to do the same thing because your experiences were never put into consideration.
Yeah, there actually was quite a bit of debate in the Air Force because they did have to modify cockpits they can now take pilots down to about 5'2", and up to 6'4". But there was never a debate about when they had to modify cockpits they put an upper limit on men's heights because they're like, we can't make the cockpit any bigger than this, and if you're bigger than that, you're not going to be able to fit in it. There was never a debate about we got to just, they just said, okay, well, if you can't fit, But of course, when they have to accommodate small people because they're women, then it becomes a debate, becomes a thing.